Well, I'd like to start this off by thanking everyone for being here this afternoon. If you didn't notice, you are not only in the plaza at the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, you are also within eyesight of the new Bureau of Land Management office under construction just on the other side of this parking lot here in the city of Marina. Is that right, Bruce Delgado? Are we in the city of Marina? And I'd like to actually start this discussion a little bit with some acknowledgments of some of the key folks that are here from our local community that are here representing those interests. I'd like to start with the mayor of the city of Marina, Bruce Delgado, who has multiple roles here today. He's been an activist here at the former Fort Ord for wildlife activities. He's been a BLM employee for many years, and he's the leader of this community that we happen to be sitting or standing in today.
Today I have to take down the chairs.
All right. I'd like to also acknowledge Supervisor Dave Potter from the County of Monterey, the Mayor of the City of Seaside, Ralph Rubio, the Mayor of the City of Delray Oaks, Jerry Edelin, the President of California State University, Monterey Bay, Eduardo Ochoa, Marina Coast Water District Board Member Peter Lay, Congressman Farr's Deputy Alec Arago. And while it's true that almost everybody here is important enough to also be acknowledged, those are our elected leaders or their reps who are here. I thought I saw Nicole Charles, but she's hiding someplace, right, Nicole? Nicole Charles from Majority Leader Monning's office. And also our state senator, and Erica Parker from Assemblymember Stone's office. So if there's an elected person here that I missed, raise your hand. I got them all. All right. Two comments. Well, the first one is, this is a wonderful celebration of the 15th year anniversary of the National Conservation Lands Program, and you'll hear from the folks who have responsibilities for that. But I'd like to acknowledge the importance of that program here at the former Fort Ord because of the existence of that program. The Fort Ord Reuse Authority leadership, Dave Potter, Ralph Rubio, Jerry Edelin, and many others, recognize the opportunity to use that program and to advocate for the Fort Ord public lands becoming a part of the Fort Ord, the long-term program being named the Fort Ord National Monument, and become part of the National Conservation Lands Program. That provides us with many opportunities to get additional resources that are necessary. It recognizes on a national scale the importance of this property. It helps with tourism, right, Jerry Edelin? So it's an important program, and I'd just like to remind everyone that the existence of that program allowed us to advocate for the president to dedicate this property in that way. And so that helps all of us in this region, not just for the conservation program, but also for the public's access, the public's knowledge of what value it brings to this region. And the second thing I'd like to acknowledge is the partnership that we have, the Bureau of Land Management, that's been a strong partner in everything we've done just about here at the former Fort Ord, in helping to design access and trails and programs that allow our public to have an appreciation for the Fort Ord public lands, in working with California State University, Monterey Bay, and the city of Seaside, the county of Monterey, the city of Delray Oaks, and Marina, and aligning them with us as we figure out how to do the conservation, the habitat conservation programs that are important for us to preserve into the future the wonderful habitat areas we have on the former Fort Ord. And the work that BLM does as colleagues with the United States Army, who originally was responsible for the conservation of the Fort Ord public lands and made this and retained it in its high quality. Bill Collins, we didn't forget you, made that important. So I'd just like to acknowledge those important pieces of this overall program that we will all appreciate into our older age, in some cases like me, already there. Now I'd like to introduce Eric Morgan, who will highlight some parts of this program and introduce the leadership from BLM that's here with us today. Eric.
Thank you, Mike. It's just a pleasure to be here today, and I really want to thank the Fort Ord Reuse Authority for co-sponsoring the event here today and offering up the hour before the executive committee meeting to jump in and have this meeting. So thank you so much. And also the help that a lot of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority staff did in setting up the venue today. So thanks so much, Laura. That includes you. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge and thank Fort Friends, who is co-sponsoring the event today. Fort Friends did a great job providing those refreshments and cupcakes, so hopefully you'll grab some of those. And I want to point out Henrietta Stern, who's the president of Fort Friends. Henrietta, if you could stand up. Now, Henrietta has a long vested interest in Fort Ord because she was one of the few folks that actually made their way to Washington, D.C. Got to shake the president's hand and tell the president of the United States that this place should be designated as a national monument. So I'm glad you did that, Henrietta, and I think a lot of people in this community are glad that you did it. And thanks so much for your continued involvement with the Fort Ord National Monument. So thanks so much for co-sponsoring this today. I'm just going to follow up and say thank you. Michael pointed out a lot of the elected officials that are here today joining us, and those elected officials have been so supportive of the National Monument. And it's just one of the greatest places, the greatest jobs in the world is to work in a community with so many community stewards that love the land, that love the opportunities that are out here. And that's not necessarily consistent across the country. There's a lot of places across the country where the stewardship ethic you all have doesn't exist. So I don't know if it's something in the water or what it is, but you definitely make this a great place to work, a great place to live, and I really appreciate you being here and celebrating this special event for us today. So like Michael said, is if you take a peek through there where that construction site is, and Peter definitely knows this, is that'll be the new regional Hollister Field Office location. And from the BLM today, we have Rick Cooper, who's the Hollister Field Office Manager. And also we have our District Manager, Esty Stiefel, with us today. Esty. And representing our Washington office is Kathy Bailey. So thank you, Kathy. Kathy runs the Wild and Scenic River program, so I saw her taking a look at Toro Creek today. So it's about the only thing that, not Toro Creek, but Salinas River. It's the only thing that has water in it anymore. So we're really looking forward to moving all of our office operations, both the Fort Ord team and the main Hollister team, together under one roof. Right now, for the longest time, we've been fairly inaccessible back at Range Control Compound. And although it's kind of fun working in a desk where the former Range Control Compound staff used to work, we're very difficult to get a hold of. And so I think just the very nature of us being more accessible, we will all benefit together with that relationship. So I'm going to do something is we're going to unveil the sign. I'm actually going to unveil the sign and tell you a little bit about it, the story of the sign and how it's related to the National Conservation Lands. So you all know that we're here to celebrate the 15-year anniversary of the National Landscape Conservation System, and that system contains national conservation lands, which Fort Ord National Monument is a component of. So if I were to say what's the closest national monument from where you all sit, what would you all say?
National Monument.
Which one?
California Coastal National Monument.
California Coastal National Monument. If you look right through that alleyway right there and you see the ocean, 12 nautical miles out, the entire length of the state of California was the California Coastal National Monument. I know Congressman Farr was a mover and shaker on the designation of that in 2000. So that is actually the closest national monument to where we stand. Many of us are more familiar with the National Marine Sanctuary, but it is actually a national monument along the entire coast of California. The second closest national monument, of course, is the Fort Ord National Monument, which I have to say I'm a little biased, but it is the best national monument. So I think what I'd like to do is try to unveil the sign and then tell you a little bit about a story about what's behind the sign. So that's the new sign. So it's a different appearance, and what you're going to find across the Bureau, especially across the National Conservation Land System, is this new look and feel of these signs. It's a different color, different imagery used, and I have to say I really enjoy banner artwork that was selected for it. So starting from the left to the right, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the imagery that's in that banner and how it's all related to this community that we live in, this community that we work in, and this place that we love that's called Fort Ord National Monument. So there's two large oak trees that are in the imagery to the left. One is a California coast live oak. These live oaks are probably the most numerous oaks that are out here. We have about 1,000 to 2,000 acres of coast live oak on the Fort Ord National Monument. It's a pretty awesome oak. The reason it's an awesome oak is because it's one of the mainstays of the Native Americans when they were out here before European occupation, or European settlement, I guess. But that was one of their main food sources that they had. The oaks live about 300 years old and provide great habitat for a lot of really wonderful animals. The other oak that's out here is the valley oak. That's a larger oak. It's the largest oak in California. It can sometimes live to be upwards to 600 years of age. It's an oak that was around when Juan Bautista de Anza was making his historic journey from Monterey, finding an inland passage across Fort Ord, eventually making his way up to San Francisco. As far as the grasslands go, we have about 2,500 acres of these grasslands, including the very rare and very special purple needle grass. What does your class call it, Susie? Oh, you can't really say it. But it's in 2004 that was designated by the state as the state of California's native grass. That is our state grass. The wonderful thing about that grass is that it's a perennial grass. It has root systems that go down 20 feet in the ground. So as far as grass systems go, that does a pretty good job with erosion control. It holds hillsides together. So that's a grass that we want to see more of on the Fort Ord National Monument. As far as the trail system goes, we didn't put a hiker or a biker or equestrian on that imagery because we wanted you to project yourself onto that imagery that you're seeing. So whether you're a hiker or a biker or riding a horse, there's 86 miles of wonderful trail opportunities out there. And have to say it's home to some wonderful events, and many of those events bring a lot of revenue into the community with the numbers of people that come out. I don't know if it was Alec has mentioned this before. I don't think it was just by chance that the designation happened to correspond with the Sea Otter Classic mountain bike event, but certainly that event brings in so many people that I think it was pretty important to try to unleash and announce the designation of Fort Ord during that popular event.
That's what convinced the White House staff.
There you go. So the other thing I want to point out is next to the soldier up here is the Maritime Chaparral poster child, which is the Toro Manzanita. So the Toro Manzanita, about 90 to 95% of its known global distribution is up here at Fort Ord. So if it wasn't protected, and if our friends at the Army weren't doing such a good job trying to regenerate it in concert with their cleanup, that would definitely be a federally listed and federally protected species. The final thing is, I know when the base closed, we wanted to make sure that everybody in this community realized that we remember the roots of this place. So this place has a proud military history starting in 1917 all the way to 1994. We were trying to find a soldier that would somehow transcend time. We weren't sure whether we were going to try to honor the 7th Infantry or the 6th, or which different branch of service we wanted to do. So we found this drill sergeant. We think the drill sergeant was a good selection because drill sergeant, first of all, is wearing a campaign hat from World War I, so that's kind of old and historical. Kenny tells me that when he was in the Army, the last thing you ever want to do is make fun of the drill sergeant's hat. You don't even want to think about touching that drill sergeant's hat, right? So, and you don't want to call it a lemon squeezer either. So, but the drill sergeants had a pretty unique job at Fort Ord, and what they did was they were responsible from transitioning civilians into fighting machines. So they took civilians and through a transitionary process, turned those folks into fighting machines for military use. So we thought it was very fitting to continue having a drill sergeant up here now that we're going from military use, that he can oversee transitioning back to civilian use. So that's kind of the story behind this banner. We're just honored to be unveiling it with you today. And now it's my great pride to announce or to introduce to you to Jim Kenna, who's our State Director of California. So thank you so much.
I was kind of curious what the introduction would be. He was talking about how you venerate things that are old, and I didn't know if he was going to go there or not. And I had a list that the folks gave me to be sure and acknowledge, but let me say that there's been a couple of pretty good efforts at this, but I did want to call out the fact that the list itself is impressive. If you think about all the elected officials that have had a role, if you think about the reuse authority, and then think about some of the interest groups, that the Cycling Association, the California State University folks that are here, all the different players that represent part of the community of people that are saying, this is important to do, this is the right thing to do, this is the direction we ought to head. That's the thing I wanted to talk about the most. But one of the things I was asked to talk about, to put in context, is to speak a little bit from a national and a statewide perspective about what is the meaning of the National Conservation Lands, and what's the relationship of Fort Ord National Monument to that meaning. So I'm going to start with sort of what's in the system. And if you think about national conservation lands, you think about 874 places. Think about remote to very, very accessible. Think about mountains, coastlines, red rock canyons, river canyons, deserts, almost any environment, particularly that you can see in the West, is represented. As a national monument, a national conservation area, a wilderness area, a wild and scenic river, that is the composition of the system. So put a few statistics on that. That's about 30 million acres of American landscape, uniquely, iconically American landscape. 8,184 miles of rivers and trails. And what kind of a system, I mean, how is this different than a system of just parks or wildlife refuges? And I would say the most important difference is this, that this system was designed specifically to be inclusive to communities of people. And that's why it fits so well with the Fort Ord process. It is designed to involve people that value open spaces, natural settings, that are interested in the role of these open spaces and natural settings in the quality of life of the community. And when do you know you're seeing that? I would submit to you that you know you're seeing it when you see it in their schools and you see it in their public service. And that is here. That is why I think Fort Ord is such a unique and positive example of what the concept was intended to be. So let me take it out, or scope it out even a little bit further for a minute, and I'm going to bring it back to Fort Ord and kind of talk about how important this place is. And I want to scope it way out, and you're going to think when I say this that, oh, this guy must have a 20-page speech, but I'm going to take it all the way back to the beginnings of this country, and I'm going to tell you that between the beginnings of the nation and 1891, our national policy was mostly about converting lands that came into public ownership back out into private ownership. And then I'm going to fast forward to 1891 and say, well, what changed then was the Forest Reserve Act, which was the first time in our national policy we had a concept that said there's some stuff we ought to just keep as public, that we ought to keep for public purposes, and those at the time were called forest reserves. And then you go to 1929. I'm going to pick out a specific year here, and in a moment you're going to see why that is so important. In 1929, that policy of disposal was still very, very active. And I'll give you a few statistics that put some scope and scale to that as well. In 1929, 1 year, 2.5 million acres of public land were converted into private ownership through a process called land patenting. Put it in California, that's 172,000 of those acres. So California wasn't a huge part, but still a big and significant part. But in 1929, the King Range in California was something different. President Hoover at the time said, we're going to retain what's left in the King Range in public ownership, a big shift in the concept. And if you fast forward to what the meaning of that is in the national system today, that there are, and how it fits to California, there are two areas that were represented in the organic legislation in 1976, the Federal Land Policy and Management Act that created the Bureau of Land Management. Two areas nationally that were identified for that retention and conservation. One was the King Range, which had been designated by a law in 1970, and the second was the California Desert Conservation Area. So California was at the center of this idea of moving the conservation system, the national conservation lands system, forward. Today, in that system, 1/6 of the total system is in California, in 174 locations, including 4 national monuments, 2 of which you just heard about here. So let's come back to Fort Ord and ask the question, or answer the question, well, what is so significant about Fort Ord? And I would argue that in the modern context today, Fort Ord reinvigorated the idea that goes clear back to the very early days of the system, that a community-based effort can form the foundation for the establishment of national conservation lands. And I would also argue that what happened here at Fort Ord created momentum that is currently statewide. And here's my case for that. Think about the period that led up to the designation of Fort Ord National Monument. The community invited Secretary Ken Salazar out, Deputy Secretary David Hayes out, Director at the time of the Bureau of Land Management, Bob Abbey. The community, and you'll see an example of that with the office building going up over here, welcomed the employees, the federal employees of the Bureau of Land Management into the community, inside the community, made them part of the community itself. That story, together with a very, very clear request, made it back to the President Obama, the President of the United States, and within months, Fort Ord National Monument was a monument. That's pretty impressive. But I would also point out that communities are still looking at the example of what happened at Fort Ord. And part of what they see when they outside looking in at what is happening here is the National Public Lands Day. What happens then? The monthly trail work days that happen, the return of the natives projects that are the plantings that are going on out at Fort Ord National Monument. They see the community out and engaged and on the monument doing things that are positive and constructive. They see 600 young people every year volunteering on Fort Ord to do things like that, the planting projects, and volunteering 2,600 hours of labor every year out on the ground. They see Monterey County Supervisor Jane Parker going over to the folks in Santa Cruz and talking about what happened here and offering the lessons learned kind of perspective from the local communities. They see Secretary Bruce Babbitt coming to the coast and saying, you know, the Coastal National Monument is important. They see the Secretary John Laird coming to the coast and saying the California Coastal National Monument is important, and the involvement of communities is a key element to that. One last point that I wanted to make. I told you that I thought one of the most important pieces of evidence that a community is engaged and part of what is going on is what you see in the schools. This morning, I spent some time at Toro Park Elementary. And I got to tell you, it pulled out the grandpa in me. It was really fun. And I saw those kids coming forth, and these are third graders, about 70 or 80 of them, third graders, and they were coming through and they were telling me, well, what did you learn on Fort Ord National Monument? And I heard about eagles, and I heard about frogs, and I heard about sheep, and I heard about goats, and I heard about worms. I heard about, and some of the concepts that, remember, these are third graders, were pretty sophisticated. Well, what's going on with the salamander? Well, it's digging down into the underground because that's how it survives. Third graders. What is the community doing in terms of passing their knowledge and their sort of fire in the belly feeling for the landscape you live on to the next generation? I would say the evidence is clear, and you are to be congratulated for what you have done in just the short 3 years since this monument has been designated. So in summing it up, I would leave just a handful of thoughts with you. One, it's clear that national conservation lands have a very, very special meaning here in California. That Fort Ord National Monument in specific is a model for what citizen engagement can do and can mean on a national scale when it comes to conservation. And that is important not only nationally, but regionally. Think about the contributions to the quality of life of the Monterey Bay region. What does it mean to live here, to have those assets in your community? Then the last point I wanted to touch on is that I wanted to thank you on behalf of the Bureau of Land Management for welcoming the Bureau of Land Management employees into your community. It's more than just a partnership. It feels like we're inside, and that's good. So thank you.
Before we close out, just a couple of quick comments. A few weeks ago, we had the privilege of former Secretary Ken Salazar joining us in this community, and the first thing he did when he came in was take his wife and go to do a tour of Fort Ord and to show her the National Monument and why he thought that was important. And I talked to him later on that afternoon after he had gone up there, and he talked about what he remembered about this community, about the involvement of nearly every elected official and every community member in recognizing the importance of the open space lands and how it contributes to our local economy, how it contributes jobs, how it contributes opportunity, how respect for the national environment is crucial. When I was listening to his comments, it made me remember just how many of the folks on the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board have a real connection to what this is. Part of the monument is in Supervisor Potter's district. It's immediately adjacent to California State University, Monterey Bay. It's in the city of Seaside. City of Delray Oaks is a border. City of Monterey is a border to the National Monument. Not to mention that Salinas almost borders the National Monument. So it affects all of the folks in this community. So that's crucially important. I noticed, in fact, the city of Marina's importance, the level of importance that they place on the trails that they're putting together to connect to the National Monument. And while we were sitting here, I noticed that Mayor Pro Tem Frank O'Connell, who's trying to hide over there, showed up. We have to recognize Frank because he's also the chairman of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board, therefore one of my many bosses. In addition, we talked about all the kids. We have kids that come through here every day with their parents asking us about the National Monument. I think that's crucial and important. Speaking of kids, there are cupcakes right through that door for everybody who's come today. I know that all of you love cupcakes. On them will be reminders of the fact that you were here for this particular dedication today. And with that, I'll close out this event. Thank you.